U.S. President Donald Trump's hopes of a grand bargain he negotiated are quickly falling apart. While his chaotic tactics managed to bring Ukraine to the table, resulting in the U.S. and Ukraine agreeing to a 30-day ceasefire in the Ukraine war, that ceasefire was always conditional on Russian President Vladimir Putin saying yes. That would never happen with the initial ceasefire draft. Trump knew that, but he also knew that the 30-day ceasefire proposal would prompt more talks with Putin. That's exactly what happened. Trump and Putin talked. They even came to an agreement. Then Putin stabbed Trump in the back and humiliated America's president by going back on his word immediately. Trump's ceasefire has crumbled before it even began. So what happened? On March 12, Al Jazeera reported that delegates from Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's cabinets arrived in Saudi Arabia to start peace talks. These discussions didn't involve Russia, much like Trump's earlier Saudi-based conversations with Putin's people didn't involve Ukraine. The talks were fruitful. By the end of an 8-hour meeting, the US and Ukraine had agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. The countries released a joint statement saying that the ceasefire proposal would include all ground, naval and aerial operations. There was no mention of either side ceding territory. Plus, Ukraine agreed to resume talks with the United States about a massive critical minerals deal as soon as possible. This outcome appeared to be a massive win for Trump. However, the ceasefire was also conditional on Putin agreeing to Russia laying down its arms. Trump likely knew that was an impossibility, at least with the version of the ceasefire negotiated with Ukraine. Predictably, Putin said no. The ceasefire terms weren't clear enough for Russia's president, and they didn't do enough to solve what he called the root cause of the Ukraine problem. Putin also laid out his own conditions. Beyond solving the root cause of his invasion, which appears to be his belief that Ukraine shouldn't exist at all, Putin wanted more details. He claimed that Russia was in control of the war, particularly in Kursk, where he said that Ukraine troops were soon to be surrounded. He also had questions about how the 30 days would be used by Ukraine. Would Zelensky rearm his military, retrain his soldiers? How would the entire thing be controlled? But most importantly, Putin said, "We need to negotiate with our American colleagues and partners. Maybe I'll have a call with Donald Trump." That's precisely the response Trump was hoping for. To America's president, the initial ceasefire negotiation with Ukraine was more of a first step toward peace than an absolute that Putin had to accept. He wanted Putin to broach the topic of a follow-up conversation. Once Trump had Putin on the phone, America could hash out the details and bring the ceasefire closer to becoming a reality. The call was scheduled for March 18. In the hours leading up to the call, media outlets speculated about what Putin and Trump would discuss. The BBC pointed out that Trump had already claimed that many elements of the temporary peace agreement had been agreed, though he also stated that much remains to be negotiated in a post on the Truth Social platform. Each week brings 2,500 soldier deaths from both sides, and it must end now, Trump exclaimed. "I look very much forward to the call with President Putin." If Trump's mood was upbeat, Putin's was typically more reserved. When asked about what the phone call would cover, Kremlin mouthpiece Dmitry Peskov declined to comment. "We never do that." Perhaps he didn't need to. Putin has already made his feelings about the initial ceasefire agreement clear. It left Russia with too many unanswered questions. "The idea is right and we support it," Putin said days earlier, "but there are questions that we need to discuss." Putin had earlier said those questions would focus on what Ukraine would do during the 30 days and how the ceasefire would be controlled. Trump gave more indications about the potential topics of conversation on March 16th, 2 days before the phone call. "We'll be talking about land, we'll be talking about power plants, we're already talking about that, dividing up certain assets." To Trump, the call with Putin was yet another chance to strike a deal. Finally, March 18 arrived, and nothing. At least not for a while. Putin set the stage for the humiliation to come by leaving Trump hanging for over an hour beyond the call's scheduled time. This was a pure power play by Putin. He wanted to show Trump that he held the cards in these discussions. It makes sense. Putin believes that Trump wants to be known as the US president who achieves peace in Ukraine. But for Russia's president, it doesn't really matter if a ceasefire is declared. He feels he has the advantage in his Ukraine invasion. His troops are slowly pushing Ukraine out of the Kursk Oblast, and Russia gained 1,609 square miles of Ukrainian territory in 2024 thanks to Putin's renewed push in Ukraine's east. Trump wanted something. Putin was indifferent, and according to the British media outlet The Express, Putin even laughed off warnings that a prior engagement was going to make him late for his call with Trump. Putin was speaking to the annual Congress of the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs even as he was supposed to be talking to Trump. SciLive reports that the event's organizer, Alexander Shukin, was even looking at his watch as Putin talked. He'd been told by Peskov that Putin's crucial call with Trump was scheduled for 4 p.m. Moscow time. Putin was still at the event past 4 p.m. Don't listen to him, that's his job. Putin apparently told Shukin after Peskov mentioned that the call was already overdue. Well, I don't know, Shukin replied. Now we need to see what Trump says about this. Putin's entourage eventually left the event around 5 p.m, embarking on a 20-minute journey back to the Kremlin. By the time Putin picked up the phone, he'd kept Trump waiting for over an hour. That was the first insult Putin delivered to Trump. He'd forced the president of the world's strongest nation to sit around and wait while he enjoyed a day out at a Russian event. The next insult would come after the call and be far more humiliating for Trump. Before that, the phone call still had to be completed, and to his credit, Trump managed to overlook Putin's initial insult and begin negotiations. Nobody knows exactly what was said during the conversation. However, Washington emerged from the call with good news. Putin had agreed to a partial ceasefire. Reuters reports that Putin told Trump that Russia would stop attacking Ukraine's energy facilities for 30 days. It wasn't the full ceasefire the US and Ukraine had hoped for, still, it was a step in the right direction. Ukraine almost immediately said that it would support the scaled-back version of Putin's agreement. If Russia stopped attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, Zelensky's forces will halt their own devastating attacks on Russia's oil refineries. The White House also confirmed that plans for much broader talks were discussed during the call, though we don't know yet when those talks might happen or if Ukraine will be involved in the discussions. The Kremlin even confirmed the ceasefire. It announced that Putin had ordered an immediate stop to strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Trump was jubilant. Speaking to Fox News, he said, "We had a great call, it lasted almost 2 hours." Other commentators were a little more skeptical. Christine Berzina, who's the managing director of the German Marshall Fund think tank, called the limited ceasefire a very small step forward. This call brought to light how difficult of an interlocutor Russia is going to be and the general unwillingness of Russia to talk about making real progress in stopping this war, she added. Berzina likely had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. Susan Colborne, who's a European security issues expert at Duke University's Stanford School of Public Policy, was also wary. It was striking how little concession Trump is asking from the Russians, although they have invaded their neighbour. She was right. Little talk of concessions appears to have been part of the phone call. The BBC reports that Putin and Trump also discussed the potential of creating a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea. That would be far more beneficial to Russia than Zelensky, given that Ukraine has decimated a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet. Putin hasn't been able to use that stretch of water to his advantage as he'd hoped. A ceasefire there would basically amount to Russia asking Ukraine to stop attacking its ships and Crimean ports with missiles and drones. As telling were the issues not discussed during the phone call. There were no talks about a full ceasefire, according to the BBC. Putin would never agree to that. It also appears that Trump didn't discuss Putin's key condition for achieving a lasting peace. That condition is that Ukraine has to stop rearming itself, along with no longer receiving military aid or intelligence from other nations, if Russia is even to consider peace. Putin knows that's not going to happen. The US may agree to stop supplying Ukraine with weapons and intelligence. It's done so before, though it reversed that decision after Trump's ceasefire talks with Zelensky. However, the same can't be said of Ukraine's European partners. Many see Putin as a threat to their own sovereignty, especially if he gets his way in Ukraine, and have pledged to support Ukraine until it wins the war. But back to Berzina's unexpected prophecy. It came true faster than anybody expected. Putin had no intention of upholding his end of the ceasefire agreement. He'd used the phone call to pull the wool over Trump's eyes. The entire call was a power play. Putin used it to scope out America's true position, including how hard America would push him to make concessions. When he discovered that the US wasn't going to push him at all, he paid lip service to an energy infrastructure ceasefire that he knew he was going to break. How do we know Putin intended to break the ceasefire? He's already done it. On March 19, almost immediately after Putin's call with Trump concluded, Russia launched a massive missile, drone and bomb attack against Ukraine. The early hours of the morning saw a horde of drones descend on a railway power station in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk. Press services in the area even reported that Russia launched a secondary strike against the power station as Ukrainian crews worked on clearing away the aftermath of the first. Alexander Shevchenko, who's the deputy director and head of communications and customer experience in the Ukrzalizny region, offered a clear response. This is what immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure looks like. At 1:20 a.m., Russia struck Ukrainian railways' energy facilities in the Dnipro region twice, even as firefighters and a rescue train worked. That's not all. Beyond attacking the railway power station, Russia also launched an airstrike targeting the energy infrastructure in Slavyansk. The city, which is in the Donetsk region Putin targeted throughout 2024, is home to 100,000 people. According to the Kiev Post, much of that city is now without electricity. The Slavyansk attack was apparently carried out using an aerial bomb and took place less than an hour after Trump and Putin had ended their call. Less than an hour. That's how long it took for Putin to go back on his word and betray Trump. There are no two ways around it. This was a massive humiliation for America's president. After hanging up the phone, Trump must have thought that he was finally getting somewhere with his Ukraine invasion peace negotiations. Sure, a ceasefire on energy infrastructure strikes wasn't a full ceasefire, but it was a step in the right direction. It's a step that the US and Ukraine agreed to take. But as both of those nations moved forward, Putin stayed behind and approved an attack that broke the proposed ceasefire immediately after it had started. And this has big implications for the future of the Ukraine war. Russia's Slavyansk and Dnipropetrovsk strikes showed Trump that he can't take Putin at his word. That may come as a surprise to Trump. As recently as February 27, Trump was telling reporters that he believed Putin would keep his word about any form of peace negotiated. I don't think so. I think when we have a deal, it's going to be a deal, Trump told reporters in the White House when questioned about British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's suggestion that Russia would just invade Ukraine again without a US military backstop. I think he'll keep his word. I've known him for a long time now, and I think he will. I don't believe he's going to violate his word. I don't think he'll be back when we make a deal. I think the deal is going to hold for now. Trump just received a wake-up call about how wrong he is to trust anything that Putin tells him. It took less than an hour for Putin to break his word about the energy infrastructure ceasefire. Now, how long would Putin wait after a full peace deal to attack Ukraine again? That's a question Trump now has to mull over as he pulls out the knife Putin just plunged into his back. As he's trying to find an answer, Ukraine and the US have to come to terms with the fact that Russia's assaults on Ukraine's energy infrastructure will continue. Those assaults have already been devastating. According to DXI Group, which produces analytical research, Russia carried out 25 massive attacks against Ukraine's energy infrastructure between September 2022 and September 2024. It references data pulled from the Energy Map portal, which suggests that Russia launched at least 1,400 missiles and up to 500 drones at Ukrainian energy installations during that period. The group recorded 11 of these massive strikes in 2022, with 5 in 2023, plus 9 up to September 2024. Many more have happened since. And even before the end of that 2-year period, Ukraine's energy infrastructure was already creaking under the weight of Russia's attacks. But there were bright spots. By April 2024, Ukraine had restored around 70% of the damage caused to 1,000 units of electrical equipment in Ukraine, according to the Kiev Independent. The problem is that repairs only pushed Putin to launch more of his energy-focused strikes. We saw that on Christmas Day in 2024. Knowing that millions of Ukrainians will at least be trying to celebrate Christmas at a time when temperatures regularly plunge below freezing, Putin approved a large-scale and coordinated attack against the country's energy infrastructure. That attack, which began at 6 a.m., right around when thousands of Ukrainian children would have been waking up to open presents, involved 78 missiles and 106 drones for a total of 184 munitions. Ukraine only managed to intercept 113 of these weapons. Many of the rest hit key targets, including Ukraine's thermal and hydroelectric power plants, causing rolling power outages lasting at least 4 hours in many areas of Ukraine. In Kharkiv, for instance, more than 2,677 residential buildings lost their heating due to damage caused to Ukraine's thermal power plants. That blow affected 500,000 households, most of them apartments, and took days for Ukraine to restore heating to all of those who lost it. Bear in mind that this attack took place at the height of winter. All of this shows us that there's no chance that Putin ever seriously considered an energy infrastructure ceasefire. Hitting Ukraine's heating and electricity facilities is far too valuable a tactic for Russia's leader. He gets to wreak terror among regular citizens while forcing Ukraine to expend valuable resources on repairs. The March 19 attacks on Slavyansk and Dnipropetrovsk only demonstrate that Putin isn't going to change no matter what he says. More attacks against Ukraine's energy infrastructure are coming, and that means that Ukraine isn't going to stop striking Russia's oil refineries. In what amounts to a tit-for-tat battle, Ukraine has been hitting some of Russia's most valuable energy-related assets. But where Russia is targeting assets that directly serve Ukraine's people, Zelensky's forces set their sights on the facilities responsible for transforming the millions of barrels of crude oil Russia produces annually into usable products. Those Ukrainian strikes have been extremely effective. As of February 2025, Ukraine's drone attacks has disrupted 70% of Russia's refining capacity. That's big. Refining is the process of turning crude oil into products such as gasoline, diesel, and even aviation fuel. Without those facilities, Russia makes fewer oil-related products that it can sell to the customers it has left after Western sanctions. As important to Ukraine, the strikes also limit the amount of fuel Russia can send to its ground forces on the Ukraine war's front lines. Ukraine even conducted a massive drone strike on March 16, 2 days before the ceasefire, that targeted the Druzhbaya oil pipeline. One of the world's largest oil networks, Druzhbaya supplies Russia's capital Moscow with much of its fuel. Ukraine's attack placed 50% of Moscow's fuel supply at risk. No wonder Putin wanted to pretend he desired a ceasefire. He hoped that Ukraine would agree and stop these attacks, even temporarily, so that there was no immediate follow-up. That would give his people time to repair the damage, along with allowing Putin to launch what amounts to a sneak attack against a Ukraine that believes such attacks would stop on both sides. So what about the ceasefire Trump negotiated with Putin? It's obviously dead in the water. Russia's attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure was well calculated. Putin might claim that he didn't have time to stop the assault, given that it came just an hour after the conclusion of his call with Trump. When Ukraine inevitably responds with a strike against another Russian oil refinery, Putin will claim that it's actually Ukraine that violated the ceasefire. He'd be lying. But that's nothing new to Russia's president, as Trump just discovered. Zelensky likely knew all along that Putin had no intention of keeping his word. You see, he told reporters in the wake of the Slavyansk and Dnipropetrovsk attacks, there's already an air alert, so this ceasefire is already not working. Zelensky also promised that Ukraine would fight back. There won't be a situation where Russia will continue to shell our energy infrastructure and we won't respond. We will respond, Ukraine's president roared to reporters. That's a clear message to Putin. If Russia's leader has no intention of abiding by the terms of his own ceasefire, he's mistaken if he thinks Ukraine will stop its attacks. We're likely going to see another major strike on a Russian oil refinery very soon. As for Trump, it's difficult to determine how he'll respond to Russia's latest attack against Ukraine's energy infrastructure. He's just seen a deal he negotiated immediately blow up in his face. Will he try to justify the attack on Putin's behalf while hoping that he can pick up the pieces of the already shattered ceasefire? Or will he punish Putin by providing more aid to Ukraine while levying further sanctions against Russia? Only the future will tell us. For now, let us know how you think Trump will respond to this bitter humiliation. Are you surprised Putin went back on his word so quickly? What do you think these latest attacks mean for the future of peace talks between Ukraine and Russia? Tell us in the comments, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for up-to-date information on the latest Ukrainian military innovations. We strive to be an accurate, up-to-date source of news surrounding major conflicts, and we greatly appreciate your support.